Hi everyone, welcome to week 2 of Criminal Justice 201 Policing. I'm Professor Jason Ostro, and this week we're going to be going over American government and the police. Let's get started. So this particular lesson, we're going to discuss American governmental structure and its relationship to the police. We'll review the public safety apparatus in the United States, explain the differences between federal, state, and local law enforcement, and also describe common challenges to U.S. law enforcement agencies in the United States. So American governmental structure. The first thing that's important to know about policing in the United States is that our government structure is what they call a federalist structure. There is no national police force, unlike many other countries. Many people think, oh, well, the FBI, that's a national police force. It's not. It's a law enforcement agency, a federal law enforcement agency that has certain responsibilities. Policing in the United States, because of our federalist structure, tends to be under the control of local governments. State governments oversee those local governments and they can create terms, conditions, laws, rules, and regulations, but local governments really operate law enforcement in the United States. And this is really a unique approach to policing throughout the world. And it's because of our federalist structure. The federalist structure of our government is outlined in the 10th Amendment to the Constitution, which in sum and substance says, whatever the federal government is not specifically responsible for, local governments are responsible for. Policing, roads, education, things like that are the responsibility of local governments. So when we think about how public safety is organized in the United States, we have to think about, because of our federal structure, public safety operates on all different layers of government, and it's really, really large in the United States. There are approximately 18,000 law enforcement agencies in the United States. That is far and away the most in the world. Many countries throughout the world have very few. They'll have 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. And there's a centralization to those law enforcement agencies where rules and regulations and policies and procedures all come from one place. In the United States, it's really disaggregated. It's really broken up state by state. And even within states, it's broken up even further. So most police agencies are operated at the local level of government. When we think about local level of government, we think about places like cities, towns, villages, counties, things of that nature. And there are approximately 975,000 sworn law enforcement officers in the United States. Just less than a million. And that is quite a few, right? So very big, a lot of opportunities for law enforcement careers, and it's a big complex undertaking with 18,000 law enforcement agencies spread across the 50 United States. So when we think about law enforcement, the first level of government that we want to think about is at the federal level. And the reason why is I'm starting from the top and working our way down. And this is not to suggest that one is better than the other. It's just in terms of its size and scope. So federal law enforcement is responsible for law enforcement throughout the entire country. And that's what I mean by size and scope. So you can see there's an image of the United States there. And it's a little difficult to see, but the states are broken up. But it's made to look as if it's just one continuous place. And I do that because I want to give the impression that federal law enforcement doesn't really have boundaries in the United States. They operate in between states, they operate across states, they operate within states. And when you think about federal law enforcement, you think about agencies that fall under what's called the Department of Justice, the DOJ. DOJ is headed by the Attorney General. The Attorney General is appointed by the President of the United States. So under the DOJ, you have agencies such as the FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation. I imagine most of you have heard of that. The DEA, Drug Enforcement Administration, the ATF, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, U.S. Marshals. These are not all federal law enforcement agencies. These are just some. And it gives you an example of the scope of law enforcement in the United States and how it can cross borders, cross state borders, county borders, town borders. We also, in the United States, have what's called the Department of Homeland Security, which was instituted after 9/11. Pre 9/11, you had all these different law enforcement and policing type agencies that sort of did their own thing. They operated independently, like Customs and Border, Immigration and Naturalization, TSA, FEMA, Secret Service. Secret Service has multiple roles, but and they cut across multiple jurisdictions. But after 9/11, one of the problems that people who went back and studied 9/11 identified was that we have so many different agencies doing their own thing, and they're not communicating with each other. So, like, if customs knows something and immigration knows something, but they don't share that information with each other, well, that just sort of goes into a black hole, right? So after 9/11, they started under President Bush. The Department of Homeland Security was formed, where you have all of these different agencies now fall under, sort of one big federal law enforcement agencies. And some of these agencies include Customs, Immigration, TSA, FEMA, Secret Service. This is not all inclusive. It's just an example. The Department of Treasury is also an example of federal law enforcement. They have a variety of different responsibilities, but the IRS, they have law enforcement authority, right? They can arrest people. They can garnish your wages. They can institute fines. Executive Office for Terrorist Financing, Financial Crimes Enforcement. And they do investigations, forensic investigations of finances. If you are somebody who's interested in criminal justice and finance, and you have maybe a background in finance or computers or something along those lines, or maybe you have an accounting degree or something, this can be, very rewarding and lucrative path for you because it's a highly specialized type of enforcement. Okay, Department of Interior, this is, they have certain law enforcement responsibilities as they relate to maintaining laws, rules, and regulations of our parks, like National Park Service, Fish and Wildlife, Park Police, Bureau of Indian Affairs. The United States is a very, very large country, and a big percentage of our country is open land and park space, and so that has to be policed as well. We even have park police here in New York City. Right, if you go down towards Statue of Liberty, Ellis Island, those areas over there, you do see U.S. Park Police. And then you have other federal agencies that exist. Again, at the federal level, when we think of federal level, we think of the entire country, coast to coast, such as Amtrak. You see them in Penn Station, Capitol Police, FDA, Security and Exchange Commission, Interstate Commerce. So a lot of this has to do with sort of white collar crime, white collar enforcement that occurs between states. Like, if you're operating a business in New York and New Jersey, and you have some sort of engaged in some sort of criminal activity between those two, these are the types of agencies that may do enforcement. Okay, then at the state level, and you could see the United States is broken up clearly by states there. We have 50 different states, and each has their own authority over law enforcement and their criminal justice system and their criminal justice apparatus. Now, that doesn't mean they can just act completely independently. They have to comport with federal law, the U.S. Constitution, of course. But there are definitely differences place to place in policing and law enforcement and criminal justice, state to state. Laws are different. The application of certain types of rules and regulations are very, very different place to place. Penalties are different. So the United States is really, when they talk about the criminal justice system or they talk about policing in the United States, there's really not one system. It's really more like 51 systems. And the reason I say that is because there are 50 states and one federal government. And each state has its own criminal justice apparatus, and the federal government has their own. Now there are similarities in their model penal codes, but they do differ. Some states have the death penalty, other states don't. Some states have medical marijuana, other states do not. Some states the age of consent is 16, other states it's 18. So things vary place to place. All right, so policing and law enforcement, it differs from one state to the next. And even within those states, they differ from one location to the next location, quite drastically often. And this has to do with the centralization or decentralization of law enforcement in the United States. So when we think about centralization, what that means is that all the rules and regulations are coming from one place. When we think about decentralization, we think about how localities and villages and towns can operate sort of independently as long as they operate within the rules and regulations of the law of their state and the U.S. Constitution. The United States is very decentralized, and it's that way by intent and design. very decentralized. So when you think about where we live in New York, for example, there's all different layers of law enforcement in New York State. And we tend in New York City to focus solely on the NYPD because they are the police department for our city, and it's also the largest police department in the United States by far. But there are multiple layers of law enforcement in New York State. NYPD is just one of them. So New York State law enforcement is really overseen by the state, by New York State. So New York State capital is in Albany, New York, and inside Albany they have an agency called the New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services, and they are the agency that sets the rules and regulations for a lot of police training, a lot of police hiring, a lot of police recruitment and standards, and all of these different things. So all police departments throughout the state have to comport with the rules and regulations set forth by the state. Okay, so it doesn't matter if they're NYPD or if they're New York State troopers. So some examples of New York State law enforcement, you would have New York State troopers, they call them New York State Police, New York State Park Police, New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. All of these have these are just layers of policing in the state itself. You can take a look at the New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services website, where if you want to take a look at like policing standards and training standards and recruitment standards and things like that, they have a lot of really good information there, and they also post jobs too. So take a look at it. But most policing in the United States is operated by local governments, and you have different types of local governments. So one of the most common in the United States is the county sheriff. Throughout the United States, in many parts, sheriffs are elected, and sheriffs are responsible for both law enforcement as well as corrections. So even here in New York City, we have a sheriff, but it doesn't follow the traditional model. What you have to realize is that policing in America is more typical of what goes on outside of New York City than it is what goes inside New York City. In New York State alone, there are 62 counties, and counties have their own sheriff. So you can take a look at some information on that if you want to Google BJS sheriff's offices. So sheriffs, they are typically in charge of law enforcement and corrections at the county level. And as you know from last lesson, sheriffs are from the tradition of the Shire Reeve, right? Also, local level enforcement, you have county police, city police, town police, village police. People often wonder, hey, what is the difference between a city, town, and village? And that in sum and substance, there really isn't that much of a difference. It's often just the legal definition. But cities can be places that have a lot of people, and they tend to be places that have a lot of people. But they could also have places that are small. As town and village, those terms are often used interchangeably. They just have like legal definitions are a little bit different place to place. Corporation. All right, so most policing is local. Most policing is done by cities, towns, and villages and counties. But there are issues that affect policing in the United States, particularly today, as anybody who watches the news can tell you. So a variety of issues affecting police really throughout the country. You think about issues related to diversity and how police departments have been working towards diversity, diversifying their police agencies. Now, what does that mean? Is it gender? Is it race? Is it ethnicity? Is it religion? Is it sexual orientation? So when we ask questions about, should police be more diverse, what exactly does that mean? This issue, resources and defunding, especially in the era of COVID, with these massive budget cuts that are coming to state and local governments because of tax revenues have just dropped off dramatically, and places like schools, police departments, fire departments, sanitation, those are funded by taxpayer dollars, and they're funded by primarily local taxpayer dollars. Meaning, like, if you live in New York City and you stop buying anything and you're not working, well, you're not contributing to the tax base. So, and especially in the last few months, this is a big problem in New York City with budget cuts. So resources, how do you get enough resources, especially in the era of COVID? And then there's this movement towards defunding the police, which I think is an interesting topic and something worthy of discussion. How much do you want to scale back what the police do, stop funding them, or completely, or to a certain extent? Militarization, big issue that you've seen in policing since 9/11. Anti-terrorism as well. Now, under the current administration, you have issues related to immigration, right? And this aggressive stance towards enforcement of immigration issues, which comes with its own problems. Right? The police need the help of the public in order to fight crime and solve crimes, and they can't do that if people are afraid of them. Police accountability, police training, police recruitment. These are really just things that are 21st century issues in policing. Responding to individuals in mental health crisis, that's an ongoing issue since the 1960s. And of course, police stress and suicide. These are issues that affect really police throughout all different layers of government. But since policing is primarily a local, local organization and locally controlled, it really relates to the cities, towns, and villages where policing actually occurs. Okay, so I hope that this lecture was useful to you. And moving forward this week, you have a few things to do. One is to review the 2 web links that are up on the course Blackboard site. First one is law enforcement agencies. It's a short reading about all the different law enforcement agencies, and we'll give you more details about what I've just described to you. And then review the types of sworn law enforcement officers, that website as well. Same thing, it's a website with short readings about the different types of law enforcement officers, which will go into detail about, spell out what I described to you here as well. And then you have a discussion board assignment for this week. It has 2 parts, right? So the first part is due by Thursday. The second part will be due by Sunday. Right, so make sure you complete both. I'm looking for high quality work, very thoughtful. I go in there and I read those and I make comments on them, as you can tell. And so, do the best you can with them. And they're designed to sort of have you engage and think and demonstrate what you've learned. Okay? So I wish you the best of luck this week, and I will see you online.